The first time I caught her on camera, she was standing in my flower bed, hands on her hips, inspecting one of my motion sensors like it had personally insulted her. I watched the footage twice, then a third time, just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Nope, that was definitely Nadine Zeller, president of the Homeowners Association, creeping around my yard in broad daylight like she owned the place. She didn't. I did. My name's Quentin Fargo. I'm a retired paramedic, divorced, no kids, and this house is the one damn thing I've worked my whole life to protect. I bought it 10 years ago in a quiet cul-de-sac in Maplewood Heights, a neighborhood that was supposed to be peaceful until the HOA started acting like a third-world regime with fines and rules that changed every other week. I installed the cameras after someone tried to siphon gas from my truck in the middle of the night. The police didn't do much, so I handled it myself. 4 motion-activated cameras, hardwired and legally placed on my own property, all signs posted. I wasn't spying on anyone. They pointed at my doors, driveway, and yard. Basic security. But that didn't sit right with Nadine. She showed up a week later, clipboard clutched like a dagger, knocking on my door with that forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Fargo," she said, her voice sweet and fake as a spardame, "we need to talk about your surveillance equipment." I leaned against the doorframe. "It's legal and it's staying." Her nostrils flared. "The HOA board has voted to prohibit exterior cameras visible from the street." I crossed my arms. "You can't override state law with a vote, Nadine. We'll see about that." And just like that, the war began. Within 2 days, I received a formal violation notice citing a non-existent clause about visible monitoring devices disrupting the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I appealed, citing state property laws and local ordinances, but the appeal was mysteriously lost. Twice. Then came the fines, first $100, then $200, then $500, each labeled non-compliance with community standards. I kept every letter, every email. I filed everything in a drawer labeled evidence. I wasn't just going to roll over. I've seen too much, been through too much, to let a power-tripping suburban tyrant bully me off my own land. Then things got weird. My mailbox was knocked over twice. My trash cans were accidentally left in the middle of the road by the garbage service. Someone keyed my truck. And the final straw. My back gate was left wide open even though I knew I'd locked it. That's when I upgraded. I hired a pair of off-duty security guards, friends of mine from my paramedic days, both licensed, both well-trained to watch my property in rotating shifts. They were discreet, nothing flashy. Just 2 guys in plain clothes, sitting in a car parked in front of my house, with body cams and dash cams running 24/7. The very first night they caught something. At 2 in the morning, a figure in a hoodie crept into my backyard. He scoped out the back door, then walked along the side of the house and peeked into my garage window. He didn't try to break in. He just looked, then left. But here's the kicker: the guards followed him. Not physically, just recorded where he went. He walked 2 doors down. Straight into Nadine Zeller's house. I took the footage to the police. But since there was no break-in, no damage, they filed it as suspicious activity and told me to keep an eye out, so I did. Over the next week, my security team captured 3 more incidents. A woman, one of Nadine's board members, walked up my driveway and took photos of my garage. Another board member parked in front of my house for 4 hours, just sitting there with binoculars. And then the big one, Nadine herself, again, sneaking into my backyard in the middle of the night. This time she had bolt cutters. She snipped the cable to one of my cameras, thought she was slick, but she didn't know we had infrared on the side cams. Caught her crouched down, whispering to someone over her shoulder, then slipping back through the gate like a raccoon in pearls. That was enough. The next morning I went to the city council. I brought the footage, the dates, the HOA letters, everything. I also stopped by a lawyer's office, a guy I knew from a neighborhood watch program years ago. He was more than happy to get involved, but Nadine, she doubled down. She called an emergency HOA meeting at the clubhouse, tried to make it sound like I was the problem, a hostile homeowner, creating an unsafe atmosphere, inviting strangers into the neighborhood. She didn't know half the neighborhood already hated her. I showed up with my laptop. Before we get into that, I said, cutting her off mid-sentence, I'd like to share something with everyone. I plugged into the projector and played the footage. First the guy sneaking into my yard, then the woman taking pictures, then the board member with binoculars. And finally Nadine, bolt cutters in hand, whispering to someone off screen. The room went dead silent. Then the murmurs started. She tried to talk over it. Claimed it was taken out of context, that she was checking for code violations, that I was faking the footage. That's when one of the guards stood up in the back of the room. "Ma'am," he said, "I filmed that with a body cam, time-stamped, GPS locked, want the raw files?" Nadine turned red. Not the embarrassed kind, the caught kind. I didn't even need to say anything else. The HOA board fractured that night. 2 members resigned on the spot. The rest called for a vote to suspend the fines against me until the city reviewed the case. But I wasn't satisfied with just that. I wanted accountability. And thanks to the footage, the bolt cutters, and evidence of trespassing, I finally had enough to escalate. I filed a police report. And this time they didn't file it away. 2 days after the footage went public, Nadine stopped pretending. She no longer walked her dog along my side of the street. Her usual morning strolls, where she'd linger in front yards pretending to check shrub heights or mailbox alignment, abruptly rerouted. I knew she was circling the wagons, trying to salvage whatever control she thought she still had. But the damage had been done. The city council had launched an official inquiry. Apparently, mine wasn't the only property Nadine and her inner circle had crept around at night. Once my footage surfaced, other homeowners came forward quietly at first, a few phone calls, then a few more. Within a week, I was getting knocks on my door from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. One of them was Luis Martinez, a veteran with a prosthetic leg and a temper like a tank engine on a steep incline. He lived 4 houses down and didn't say much, spent most of his time fixing old motorcycles in his garage, but when he spoke, people listened. "They fined me last spring for working on my own bike," Luis said, standing on my porch with his arms crossed. "Said I was running a commercial enterprise." I told them to show me one customer. They never did, still charged me $300. "Did you pay it?" I tried to fight it. They tacked on late fees, sent a lien notice. That was new. I hadn't heard about liens. I invited him in, and over coffee, he laid out a folder of documents meticulously organized. He'd filed complaints with the state licensing board, even hired a real estate attorney briefly, but couldn't afford to pursue it. Turns out Nadine had been threatening property liens on several residents for years, always over vague violations. Lawn length, unauthorized exterior modifications, even a kid's inflatable pool. No real hearings, no paper trail that held up when lawyers examined it. Just a lot of intimidation and bureaucracy. Luis wasn't the only one. By the end of the week, I had records from 8 other homeowners. Each story was different, but the pattern was identical. Manufactured violations, inflated fines, threats of property actions if residents didn't comply. And none of it stood up under scrutiny. I met with my attorney Galen, the neighborhood watch guy, late one evening in his office downtown. He wore a threadbare blazer and had a habit of drumming his fingers on legal pads when he got excited. "This isn't just harassment," he said, flipping through the folders. "This is fraud. If they're issuing liens based on fake violations, that's a felony." He leaned back, eyes scanning the ceiling like it owed him answers. "I think it's time we subpoenaed their financials." I raised an eyebrow. "Can we do that?" "Yeah, but we'll need probable cause and a court order." "Then let's get probable." That Monday, I filed a formal civil complaint against the HOA board, naming Nadine, 2 board members, and the HOA's contracted management company. The complaint alleged trespassing, fraud, harassment, and abuse of authority. Galen filed a motion to compel discovery, specifically their financial records from the last 5 years. The response was fast and vicious. The HOA circulated a newsletter, something they usually only sent out quarterly. This one was special. 4 pages of bold font nonsense accusing me of cyberstalking, creating a hostile environment, and endangering community harmony. They called me a radical element and encouraged neighbors to report suspicious activity at Mr. Fargo's residence. That same day, a code enforcement officer showed up on my property. He was polite but confused. "Got a complaint about an unpermitted structure," he said, gesturing toward the camera pole beside my garage. "It's a light pole with a mounted camera." "Yeah, that's what I figured, but I've got to file it anyway." I let him do his inspection. He left with a shrug. "I'll mark it as compliant," he said. "Looks like you actually followed the code." That's rare around here. That night, I doubled the guard shifts. We caught someone trying to spray paint one of the cameras, didn't even cover their face. Just walked up, can in hand, and started spraying before darting off when the motion light kicked on. We had them on 3 angles. Same guy who'd been parked in front of my house with binoculars the week before. One of Nadine's board members. I sent the footage straight to the police. The next day, he was arrested for vandalism and trespassing. And when the cops questioned him, he cracked like a dropped egg. He admitted that Nadine had asked him to gather evidence against me, anything that could paint me as unstable or dangerous. She'd even suggested he check my trash for suspicious items, whatever that meant. That was the break we needed. With that written confession, Galen filed a motion to amend the complaint, adding conspiracy to defraud and attempted character assassination. The judge approved expedited discovery and granted us access to the HOA's internal communications. We subpoenaed emails, meeting minutes, and financial records, and that's when the real rot came pouring out. The management company was funneling inflated maintenance fees into a side corporation owned by Nadine's cousin. Landscaping invoices padded by 30%. Emergency repairs that were never done. Even the community newsletter had a markup. Nadine's niece ran the print shop that charged triple the going rate, over $100,000 in unaccounted payments over 3 years. Galen's eyes lit up like he'd won the lottery. "This isn't just civil fraud," he said. "This is criminal misappropriation of funds. We're talking jail time." We filed an emergency injunction to freeze the HOA's assets pending investigation. The court granted it, and within 48 hours, Nadine's power evaporated. The state attorney general's office launched a formal probe. The HOA board was suspended. A temporary oversight committee was instated by the city, and a forensic audit began. But Nadine wasn't done. She tried to rally her remaining loyalists, maybe a dozen residents who either owed her favors or were too scared to cross her. One of them, a guy named Miles who ran a lawn service, tried to rile up the neighborhood by organizing a pro-HOA rally. Only 6 people showed up. One of them left halfway through when I walked by with Lewis and waved. Then came the anonymous letters slipped under doors, left in mailboxes. Threats, lies, claims that I was trying to dismantle the community and sell the neighborhood to developers. Classic fear tactics. But the tide had turned. People who'd stayed quiet started speaking up. A retired librarian named Ellen printed flyers detailing the financial fraud and distributed them house to house. A young couple down the street created a website with scanned documents and court filings. It went viral locally. Within a month, the entire neighborhood knew the truth, and Nadine, she tried to disappear, stopped answering the door. Her lawn went uncut, her porch light stayed off. One morning, a moving truck showed up. She left before the audit was complete, but the investigation didn't stop. The management company was fined heavily and banned from operating in the state. Nadine was charged with multiple felonies, including wire fraud and falsifying financial records. Her cousin and niece were both named as co-conspirators. The HOA board was dissolved. In its place, A resident-led committee was elected by open ballot, with strict term limits and complete financial transparency. And my cameras, still up, still legal, still recording. But now, instead of catching trespassers and vandals, they mostly see kids playing, neighbors waving, and the occasional cat sunbathing on my truck. No more fines. No more threats. Just peace. Earned, not given. Winter came early that year, like the neighborhood was trying to freeze out the last of Nadine's influence. Her house sat empty now, windows dark, mailbox overflowing, lawn stiff with frost. A foreclosure notice, laminated and taped to the front door, fluttered in the wind like a white flag she wasn't brave enough to raise herself. But the fallout wasn't over. The audit team had barely scratched the surface when they discovered something else: dozens of unfiled complaints from residents that had been processed by the HOA's management company, but never sent to city offices. It turned out the company had been charging residents for supposed permit violations, then pocketing the fees without filing a thing. No paper trail, not until now. It was Lewis who brought that to light. He'd gotten a letter claiming his garage extension lacked a proper permit and had paid the fine under protest. But when the audit team searched city records, there was no violation logged, no inspection scheduled, no permit ever filed under the HOA's name. That revelation shifted the investigation from financial fraud into something nastier: systemic obstruction and document tampering. The city brought in a criminal investigator with a forensic accounting background, a wiry man named Denholm, who always seemed 2 steps ahead of everyone else. He started knocking on doors, politely but firmly, gathering statements, collecting old HOA mailers, scanning QR codes from outdated newsletters. He was building a case, and from the way he moved, it was going to be airtight. One afternoon, Denholm stopped by my place. His eyes darted to the camera over my porch as he adjusted his scarf. "Everything still working?" he asked, tapping his notepad. "Better than ever," I said. "Want the backup footage from the last 2 months?" he nodded. "Could help. We're looking into a pattern of intimidation, specifically how they enforced fake violations, then used the threat of legal action to suppress complaints." I waved him inside and pulled up the archives. As the files uploaded to his flash drive, he looked around the room, pausing at the photos on the mantel: me in uniform, me shaking hands with the mayor after a fire rescue, a faded snapshot of my old dog, Scout. "You ever think about running for the committee?" he asked. I actually laughed. "Me? I've already made enough enemies." "Exactly," he said. "That's why you'd be good. You don't care who you upset as long as you're right." I didn't answer right away. The idea hadn't crossed my mind, and I wasn't sure I liked it now that it had. "I'll think about it," I said. That Friday, we held a neighborhood meeting, not in the clubhouse, which was still under investigation, but in the community church gymnasium. The folding chairs were mismatched, the microphone crackled, and the old basketball hoop groaned in the rafters every time the wind blew. But it worked. We weren't there to vote. We were there to listen. First up was a single mother named Tasha who lived on the corner lot by the creek. She'd been threatened with eviction over what the old board called unauthorized commercial activity. Her crime: running a home-based Etsy shop making wreaths and baby blankets. She pulled out one of the letters, eyes steady but voice tight. They said I was violating zoning laws. Said if I didn't shut down, they'd report me to the county. I called the county. They'd never heard of me. Then came Mrs. Kapoor, who'd received a fine for putting up a Diwali display in her yard: twinkle lights and handmade paper lanterns. The violation was never explained. She paid it anyway, just to avoid more trouble. Her husband had passed the year before, and she hadn't wanted to draw attention. Then a teenager named Corey stood up, holding what looked like a binder of screenshots. He'd been volunteering to mow lawns for elderly neighbors free of charge until Nadine accused him of operating without a landscaping license. He'd been forced to stop. The crowd didn't shout. No one booed. It was worse than that. They listened in total silence. When the testimonies ended, someone asked if any of the remaining board members wanted to speak. Only one did, an older man named Arthur, who'd served on the board since it was founded. He stepped up to the mic with a piece of paper shaking in his hand. "I didn't know what she was doing," he said. "I just signed what she gave me. I trusted her." Someone in the back muttered, "That's not good enough." Arthur nodded. "I know." By the end of the night, the room had changed. Not just the people in it, but the air itself. It felt like something heavy had been lifted, but no one knew what to do with the space it left behind. That weekend, I got a visit from Galen. He'd just come from a deposition and looked exhausted, his tie crooked and his voice hoarse from too many hours of legalese. "We got the judge to approve restitution," he said, flopping into the chair across from me. "If we win the civil case, everyone who paid fraudulent fines could get their money back." I raised an eyebrow. "You think they'll go for that? They won't have a choice. The management company's already negotiating. They don't want this going to trial. Too much bad press. Criminal charges still moving forward, absolutely. Nadine's facing jail time, the cousin's cutting a deal, and the niece lawyered up." Galen stood, brushing crumbs off his coat from the cookie he'd swiped off my counter. "You're going to be asked to join the interim committee," he said, not a question. "They need someone with a spine and receipts." I didn't answer right away. Again, the next morning I walked the neighborhood, not to patrol, not to check for new cameras. Just to see things the way they looked now. Tasha was in her yard, hanging fresh wreaths. Corey was mowing Mr. Branson's lawn again. Mrs. Kapoor was repainting her front porch, music playing softly from a speaker hidden in her planters. No one looked over their shoulder. No one flinched when someone passed by. At the end of the block, I ran into Ellen, the retired librarian. She was resetting the community bulletin board, pulling down outdated notices and pinning up flyers for a potluck. "You coming?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded. That night I sat in my garage, lights dimmed, flipping through a folder Galen had left with me. It wasn't about the past, it was a blueprint for the future. A new charter, new policies, checks and balances, rotating leadership, no management company, full transparency. There was even a line item for a neighborhood emergency fund, something I'd suggested offhand in a meeting weeks ago. He'd written it in. The folder felt heavier than its pages should have made it, but I didn't put it down. By the following week, the interim election was announced. No fanfare. Just a printed note on the bulletin board, a copy mailed to each household, and a digital version posted to the new neighborhood website. 7 candidates. 5 open seats. I added my name last. I didn't campaign, didn't knock on doors or distribute flyers. I figured people either knew who I was by now or didn't want to, and yet when the results came in, my name was first on the list. We held our first committee meeting in the church gym again. No clubhouse. Not yet. We made our decisions in the open, no executive sessions behind closed doors. Residents came, asked questions, challenged our ideas. We welcomed it, encouraged it. That's how it should have always been. We voted to drop all pending fines. We established a reimbursement process for anyone who'd paid one in the last 3 years. We set up a hotline for reporting fraud, one that went directly to the city, not through the committee. And we banned third-party management contracts without full community approval. The cameras stayed up, not just mine, others too. People started installing them on their own homes, not out of fear, but because they'd seen what accountability could do. Nadine never came back. Her house was eventually sold to a young couple with a toddler and a dog that barked at its own reflection. They didn't ask about the past. We didn't volunteer it. We didn't need to. The neighborhood had changed not because we tore it down, but because we finally stood up and said, "No more." And this time we meant it. The first committee meeting after the election ended just before midnight. We didn't plan it that way, but once people got the floor, they weren't eager to give it up. No one was used to being heard, not really. And as much as I wanted to crawl into bed and forget about bylaws and quarterly budgets, I stayed. So did everyone else. We voted on everything publicly. Every line item, every suggestion. No one left early, not even the guy who'd brought a stack of gripes printed on receipt paper like he was preparing for a grocery store refund. We listened to every word. By the time we locked up the gym, the parking lot was covered in frost, and my breath made small clouds under the single overhead light. Lewis offered me a ride and I took it, not because I needed it, but because I figured he had something to say. He didn't speak until we were halfway down Maplewood Lane. You ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't caught her on camera? His voice was lower than usual, almost careful. I think about it every time I walk past her old house. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the icy road. They would have buried us, quiet, one by one. I didn't need to answer, he wasn't asking a question. At home, I sat in the living room with the lights off and the security feed glowing quietly on the TV. Not because I expected anything to happen, but out of habit. It wasn't paranoia. It was vigilance. There's a difference. 2 weeks later, we received the full audit results. Galen forwarded me a copy with one line highlighted in yellow. Unjustified financial penalties totaling over $162,000 collected from residents without legal authority. The management company settled out of court. They paid restitution into a community fund and forfeited their license. The state issued a notice of violation against every recorded HOA they managed. Some were already folding. Nadine's sentence came down quietly. 18 months, suspended after 6. She took a plea deal, avoided trial. No press showed up. No one from the neighborhood watched. We didn't cheer. We didn't talk about it. We just marked the end of something. At the next committee meeting, a teenager named Jules raised her hand during open session. She lived on the far end of the development in a house that backed up to the woods. She waited until the room settled before speaking. "Can we talk about getting rid of the gate?" The room stiffened, but no one interrupted. She continued, "It's not locked. It's not monitored. It just makes visitors feel like they're not welcome, and it's expensive to maintain. Half the time it's broken." Arthur, sitting 2 seats down from me, cleared his throat. "It's been there since the neighborhood was built. Symbolic, you could say." Jules didn't blink. "Yeah, and that's the problem." We took a vote. It passed by a wide margin. The gate came down the following week. No ceremony, just a work crew and a rusted chain-link section hauled off in the back of a flatbed. A few people grumbled. Most didn't care. The symbolic wall was gone. And nothing bad happened. Spring rolled in with a burst of color. Trees that had gone years without proper trimming finally bloomed without interference. Residents started repainting their homes in colors that hadn't been approved under the old regime. A soft yellow here, a deep green there. No one complained. One Sunday I was filling the bird feeder in the backyard when I noticed an envelope tucked under the planter by the door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Printed on it in plain black font was a question. "Do you think things are better now?" No name. No signature, just that. I didn't tell anyone about it, not right away. I didn't know if it was a threat, a challenge, or someone trying to stir up old ghosts, but I kept it. Filed it in the same cabinet where all the evidence had once lived. 3 days later, Galen called. "There's another HOA forming," he said. "Where?" 3 blocks north. New development. They're modeling it after us." I sat down at the kitchen table. Modeling it how? Resident run, no management company, transparent budget, rotating leadership. They want advice. I didn't answer immediately. "You okay with that?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just surprised. You shouldn't be. People are paying attention." I met with their organizers a week later at a coffee shop near the train station. Young couple. 2 school teachers and a retired nurse. They'd heard about our case, read the court filings, followed the updates through Ellen's website. "We just want to do it right from the beginning," the woman said. "No power trips, no secret meetings. Just safety, maintenance, and fairness." I gave them a copy of our new charter, showed them how we handled elections, appeals, and budget approvals. They took notes like students preparing for finals. Before I left, the man leaned forward, voice low. "Did they ever try to retaliate?" After you exposed everything, I looked him in the eye. They tried. It didn't work, he nodded slowly. Not out of fear, but understanding by the start of summer the neighborhood had changed again. Not drastically, no banners or street fairs or block parties, just small signs. Kids playing chalk games on driveways. A new bench outside the old clubhouse, installed by a group of volunteers. Jules organizing a reading circle under the oak tree by the creek, and the cameras, still up, still legal. But now they weren't just mine. After the audit, several residents installed their own pointed inward, not at each other. Not to monitor, to deter, quiet guardianship of their own space. No one protested. No one filed complaints, the guards I'd hired. They'd moved on. One joined a private security firm in the city. The other went back to school. We kept in touch. Every now and then, one of them would text me a photo of an overgrown hedge with the caption "violation" and a laughing emoji. We didn't need them anymore, not because the world had changed, but because we had. One night, Ellen invited me to a dinner hosted at the community center. Not the old clubhouse, this was a rented space near the high school until we decided what to do with the property. I wasn't going to go. I didn't like crowds, but I went. The room was filled with laughter, folding tables covered in mismatched dishes, the smell of too much garlic and not enough restraint. I stayed longer than I meant to, talked more than I usually did. When it ended, someone handed me a small card. It had a sketch of the neighborhood on the front, hand-drawn. Inside, it said, "Thanks for showing us how to take it back." I didn't know who had written it. I walked home in the dark. No streetlights had been removed, but somehow the place felt brighter. Maybe it was the absence of shadows that had once followed every step. At the edge of my property, I paused and looked back. No gates, no patrols, no threats of fines, just homes, just people. When I got inside, I opened the drawer where I'd kept all the letters, all the violation notices, all the photos and footage. I took the envelope with the anonymous question and placed it on top. Then I wrote an answer on a sticky note and tucked it inside. Yes.